and they had, like, you know, the head jellyfish and the head mackerel, and the congregation were called sardines.
I was reading Brother Pleasant Bay's book where he gave the sardine analogy. Can you break that down, please?
So
Because that's...
In other words, sardines, like as an example, fishermen go out and they get all the little fish, and they just steam them, put them in in cans and everything. And every fish that you see in here is not necessarily exactly the same species. So they call them sardines.
After they cut their heads off, cut their tails off, so you can't identify them.
Do you understand what I'm saying? But yet, each one of them is not necessarily the same fish. Although a lot of them swim in schools, and a lot of them are the same fish, but a lot of them are what you call just generic fish. Small schools, they steam them, called sardines, or people think they're sardines.
No such thing as a sardine,
people
right?
People who are Negro, black, and colored are classed together because it's a classification of people who have no rights. The brandings is to keep them divided from each other. Because if they all went in one direction, they would be empowered, even under a brand. Do you understand what I'm saying? Although there would be certain limited international rights, they would have power even if they all agreed to the same brand. But they don't even know it's a brand. And they don't know that the brand disallows them to inherit anything. They don't even know that they're classified as being constitutionally in a state of psychosis. There's a legal term that goes with that. I'll post that on the website. You'll see it. You understand what I'm saying?
But they were lampooning the real Moorish Science Temple, which duly had set up. And they had one episode where they had Ali Bendo, this crystal gazer, who was arrested. You see? It was like they were mocking the Moorish Science Temple. Now, what's interesting is about why I said, who was sponsoring this? It turned out to be, I think it was Pepsi. And I found out I studied the whole history of Pepsi, and the guy, it was very, I put it in the book, it's bizarre, all the connections with Pepsi, and why it relates to teeth and whatnot. But Amos and Andy was the first syndicated show in the history of broadcasting. It got syndicated was football. You know, Red Grange and all that, those days in the 20s. Not even baseball had been syndicated at that point. It was Amos and Andy. And it was a Masonic duo that had done this. They were Freemasons, high-level Freemasons, and they created this very funny show, which was so nobody could possibly take Moorish science seriously. And black people in general would be lampooned. And if you even watch the Hollywood movies of those era, and the way black people were portrayed, even beyond the Stab and Fed shit, it is just, nobody would do that now, unless they were just making fun of it, you know, Eddie Murphy or somebody. But it's like, you know, it was in such a way that white people could not take a black person seriously. And having grown up in a community where you were told that, my mother said that, no, they don't, I said, why don't black people live here? She said, they steer them away. In other words, they steer them. It was called steering. And it was just, you know, she explained it to me. And the attitudes of the people were such that, no, they weren't to be taken seriously.
And people, of course, think this is just some absurd lampooning of a ridiculous black man. It was much more than that, and it was high-level 32nd degree Masons that were doing this spoof, and they did a very good job of creating a ridiculous character. In one of the episodes, they have Stargazer Noble, or they have called him Drew. I think they call him Drew Bendo or Ali Bendo. Ali Bendo, they call him, and he's a stargazer who's thrown in jail for fortune telling. And this is shortly before, or shortly after, I don't remember which Noble Drew Ali was put in jail. They really didn't have anything to charge him with. They did release him. there's much more. Well, according to rumors, he was beaten by the police, but that does not stand up to at least what Elihu Pleasant Bey told me, who knew one of Noble Drew Ali's wives, and he had multiple wives, being a Muslim, and he said that he was not beaten. He left. He was. I think he was supposed to go under some sort of court procedure, but because there was a lot of scandal around, people had stolen things from him and whatnot, and there was a lot of legal stuff. But he basically left his body because he said the burden on the Moorish people was too great. So he exited. He said he could do more from beyond this world, and he exited.
There was a space-time project called Ong's Hat that came in New Jersey, southern New Jersey, which is known as the land of the Jersey Moors. And Ong's Hat is an obscure location in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey where there was a experimentation of dissident physicists from Princeton, hippies, Sufis, that claimed to be operating on with somebody from the Moorish Science Temple. Now Ong's Hat is part legend and part truth, but the Moorish Science Temple I'd never heard of before. But what I did know was there was a character named Peter Lamborn Wilson, there's the name Wilson coming up again, who was a member of the Moorish Orthodox Church. And the Moorish Orthodox Church was tied to Timothy Leary and the Millbrook Institute up in upstate New York. And they were kind of a CIA-affiliated church that was mocking Moorish wisdom. I say mocking. They had a certain amount of tribute to it. But I thought that this was all there was. I didn't know there was a Moorish Science Temple until I wrote this book, Synchronicity of the Seventh Seal, where I was contacted by some Moors who began to fill me in on the Moorish legacy, that it was still alive, that there was a Moorish Science Temple. These people weren't part of it. They didn't like the Moorish Science Temple. They thought that it had become institutionalized. They were Moors and they were operating outside of it. But I wrote the Seventh Seal because as I began to get a lot of, as I'm writing this information, you might say a lot of negative spirits would come to me that didn't want me to do it. Sometimes it would come in the form of media people who were ready to insult me behind my back, not on the air, but stop me from getting media appearances and whatnot. And I had to write this book to extricate myself. It was like an exorcism. And what came out of it was a very strong recognition and identification with the Moors.
The Moorish Orthodox Church was really sort of a CIA front, as far as I could, as far as I understand it. It was not a legitimate successor to the Moorish Science Temple. Now, at that point, I mean, the Moorish Science Temple exists to this day. I have friends who are a part of it. But at that time, I had no idea Moorish science had any continuation. Now, Moorish science goes back to the character you mentioned, Noble Drew Ali. And then what happened, when he left, there was a whole just horrible infighting with the Moorish Science Temple. And it was essentially destroyed. What you had was a man emerging out of this who was a very dubious man, with a big FBI file as well, Wallace Farad, or Wally Fard, as he was known. He was Polynesian-looking. He was from Hawaii, and he was the successor. But was he the rightful successor of Noble Drew Ali? No. He was the effective successor, and he had a lot of problems. He was supposedly involved with the ashram at Ong's Hat, or the land that they eventually got. That was rumor. But he was succeeded by Elijah Muhammad, who everybody's familiar with, and that began the Black Muslim movement. The Black Muslim movement, while they do acknowledge Noble Drew Ali as an earlier forerunner,
Islam to all the Moors. And let us take a moment to say that we did reach a watershed moment at Savior's Day, 2014. Did you see that speech?
No, I didn't.
It's a speech worth watching because the Moors have been kicking up a lot of dust.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at Noble Drew Ali. Here's a man that died a young man. Noble Drew Ali. He lived from 1886 to 1929. I salute my brother. He's the first man to bring Islam to us in the way he tried to bring it. And I thank him, thank Allah for him.
So now with the internet and Facebook and social network, here come back the Moors and their teachings and all of that. So this Sunday, a couple Sundays ago, Minister Farrakhan, he did something that have never been done by a Nation of Islam leader. He put Noble Drew Ali's picture up on a big mural of all the great black leaders, and he gave him credit as being the man that is teaching Islam in America before anybody else. That's Minister Farrakhan said this. He said it, as it say in words, to paraphrase him, that this man was teaching Islam here ahead of everybody else. That means ahead of Master Farad Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad, of which in the Nation of Islam you are taught under the strict religious blinder or binder that no Islam was here before Farad and Elijah. No knowledge was here before Farad and Elijah. No disrespect, because I love me some Master Farad Muhammad, but there was some knowledge and some organizing here before Master Farad Muhammad and Elijah. And the Honorable Minister Farrakhan acknowledged that and affirmed that and praised Nation of Islam leader Minister Farrakhan, praised Noble Drew Ali, and praised the Moorish movement.
There was people before he came that belonged to the Moorish Americans by Noble Drew Ali. They didn't have this on it, the moon and the star. It was blank. It was blank. But the hat was red. They wear black ones and red ones.
Moors is the name given to the Muslims from North Africa that invaded the Iberian Peninsula and brought Islam to Spain and Portugal and southern France. So he's calling us Moors, and he dressed his followers in the fez.
So this hat here is the one that we wore at the first beginning of Muslims in the city of Detroit when Master Farad Muhammad was here, and his representative at that time, and one of the times, the first one that I seen was named Abdul Muhammad. He wore one of these too. The Messenger of Allah, he wore one, and you might see this picture sitting out there with it on. He had on one just like this, only the torso was longer. That was the first time that I seen him with the hat on, like this.
The fez that the Shriners wear is the fez of the Moors. And the tassel on its top is tied down. It was not allowed to swing a full 360 degrees because they only had 33.
I'm going to give you some hints. Some you might see don't have a tassel on it, right? What is the meaning of the tassel? What is the meaning of it? Hanging down. Well, I tell you, it means the same thing that it means when you are graduating from school. That means knowledge. This here means knowledge. Same as school. When you graduate from school, I don't know if the devil ever told a lot of our people, so many black people now is graduating, they don't tell them everything, you know, they just let them get on out of here. Yeah, you all right, here's your diploma. And then when you come out, say, what nationality are you? Oh, I'm a nigger, I'm a Negro, I'm Afro-American. You still dumb as hell. Excuse the expression. But that's true, you know. But you got the tarsal on. And don't know your name.
Look at what he said. The Moors were enslaved by reducing their mentality to that of Negroes, blacks, and colored people. As a man thinketh, so is he. Moors, you sleep too much. Wake up and see the 7 bridges crossing in the sky. Can you see that you are a people? Not an organization. We are a people. We are a nation.
It is not the Moorish Science Temple. The Moorish Science Temple still exists. They have chapters in different cities like Baltimore, up in Harlem here in New York, Chicago, and many other cities. They are not necessarily the only representation of Moors, but there are certainly the Moorish Science Temples. Most of my Moorish friends do not belong to the temple. They don't necessarily see eye to eye with it, but it is the Moorish movement which is important. The mandate, which we can't get our hands on, which is probably somewhere in the Vatican. It goes back to the capitulation of Granada between the Moors in 1492, the expulsion of the Jews on March 31st, 1492, and the next day, April 1st, 1492, which is effectively the first April Fool's Day. And what happens is, after the Jews have been expelled legally, they tell the Moors, you can go back to Morocco. This is in Spain. After the Spanish at Santa Fe and Granada have conquered the Moorish army by starving them out, the Catholics hated the Moors. And they said, you can go back to Morocco. We have ships waiting for you. The Moors did not believe them. When they sent people out to look, well, they were indeed ships. So the Moors went on their way to the ships, and they burned the ships on their way to the ships, and they burned their homes while they left their homes. And that was like April Fool's, ha, ha, ha. That was the first April Fool's Day,
wow,
according to Moorish legend. So this is, and there was supposedly there was a capitulation between the Moors of Granada, whereby they ceded the new continent, as it was called, and it was called in the papers, if you look at that, isn't Ferdinand and Isabella gave Columbus. It does not say Asia, it does not say India, it calls it the new continent. And he goes to explore the new continent. And they essentially had some sort of right or lease on this land, and this would be buried somewhere in Vatican archives. And Columbus is basically going there to set up the triangular trade route, the forerunner of the triangular trade route, and to enslave the Moorish nation. And the rest is history, and this is why you have all this ridiculousness that Columbus was the discoverer of America. This is utterly ridiculous to any legitimate historian. Even if they don't believe in the Moors, they know that he did not discover America and the whole history. So that's my overview of Noble Drew Ali in a nutshell. And there's a big biography, which actually Rick Smith got through me, that was sort of the life work of Elihu Pleasant Bey, who knew Noble Drew Ali's wife, and he did a vast, extensive work of the Moorish science history and Noble Drew Ali.
The reason that he died was because the burden on the Moorish people was too great. He could do more from outside of the body than inside the body.